Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Demai, Chapter 5, Halacha 2. This will be a two-part shiur. This is part 1. In the art scroll, we're on 42a1. Now, in Halacha 5, Chapter 1, we had a case where there's an Am Haaretz baker, and in the Mishnah, it looks like perhaps the halacha is going to be by Bet Shammai. Rabbi Yochanan comes along and says, no, it's not by Bet Shammai. Really, the rabbis made a rule that when you're buying from a baker that is making tamei bread, that it's going to be upon the buyer to tithe everything. Now, when you're buying from a chaver, we covered this in chapter 1, a chaver baker, who's a commercial baker, he's going to be responsible for taking out all the tithes. Why? Because he knows how to keep all the rules of how to keep everything tamei and tahor. The Am Haaretz doesn't know how to do that. And so when he is making bread and he's taking the dough and he's making it wet, and whether he's going to be taking out challah or not, it doesn't matter. He's making everything tamei, and it's not edible. And the point is it has to be burned. So the point that Rabbi Yochanan is making is that we just let the buyer take out all the tithes. That's how they can separate out challah. Now, in this Mishnah here, in Halacha 2, we're going to have a case where they're going to teach you how to tithe tevel. And that in itself is going to seem very out of place. Now, this, by the way, you'd say, why isn't this over in Masechet Trumos? They're teaching you how to tithe all of the tevel. And in fact, how to do it where you're doing everything all at once. You're doing the procedure all at once. We have a rule in the Torah, everything has to be done in order for the tithes, and you get lashes for doing it out of order. But over here, if you're doing the tithes, they're teaching you how to make the tithes. The caveat is going to be, this formula only works if you're a Kohen or a Levi. It doesn't work if you're a Yisrael. Now, why is that? Why are they putting that here, and why aren't they putting that over in a different Gemara? Why aren't they putting it in Masechet Trumos? Because you'd say, that belongs over there. We're talking about Demai over here, and now you're telling me how to actually go through and separate out the tevel over here. Seems out of place. It's not out of place, because when you look at the Mishnahs in Halacha 3, Halacha 4, Halacha 5, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be talking about mixtures where you're going to have some loaves of bread that are going to come from different sources. Some are going to be definite tevel. Some are going to be where they are partially tithed. Some, could be where it's different suppliers. And so if you don't have a way to do the tithes, because again, part of that supply might actually be tevel, then you're going to run into a problem. So they're going to be teaching us here how to do it. So yes, it does seem out of place, but actually it's really brilliant, because of when you're looking at the rest of chapter 5, you can have cases where you're going to actually have tevel and you need to know how to tithe it. You can have some parts that are demai, some parts are actually tevel. So here's how it's going to go, and keep in mind, this would work for a grain pile, and as we'll see in the first sugya, it can also work for challah. The Mishnah says, one who wishes to separate Truma and Trumas Meiser at one time follows the following procedure. And so the Mishnah says he takes and marks off one part from 33 1/3. In other words, that's going to be 3/100 of the pile. And he says, now he's making a verbal declaration, by the way, and he says, 1/100 of what is here, in other words, 1/100 of this entire pile, which is going to be located on this side of the marked off section, is now chulin. So what's he doing? First of all, he's making a verbal declaration. He's taking a part of it and marking it off so there's a clear designation of what's what. That is also a key point. Now, we saw earlier in taking out Meiser Ani from a pile of grain that Meiser Ani of Demai, that you don't even need to make a verbal declaration. Now, over here, you do. And over here, all the tithes are going to be where there's going to be a verbal declaration. The question is, now you're taking out 5 tithes, is it going to be 5 separate verbal declarations, or could you do, in this case, one declaration for all 5? We'll see about that later in a Gemara. And the other part is that he's designating what is chulin. And chulin is going to be where it is, it's going to be like in its tevel state. Okay, so chulin is usually going to talk about tithe produce, but over here, this Mishnah is trying to mean that it's unsanctified. And why is that? Because all of the tithes haven't been taken out yet. The Mishnah continues and says the rest of the marked off portion, and basically this is talking about the other 200ths, is hereby sanctified as truma for the whole pile. Now, I want to just go over this real quick. All of this formula is going to come out to just a little bit over 5%, okay? So that's a rough way to do it, is to be like, okay, well, it's going to add up to around 5%. That, by the way, would include if you're doing challah. Now, if you're going to be getting challah from a private baker, and we know that a private baker is going to be 1/24th, a commercial baker is going to be 1/48th, that just over 5% for separating out everything all at once for challah is going to be where it's going to come up to just about 7%, just over 7%. So, but on a commercial baker, it's just over 5%. So, the Mishnah is going to say that he now takes care of the first 100th, which he originally said should remain chulin, and the 100th chulin that is here, in other words, the 100th that I originally said should remain chulin, which is on this side of the marked off portion, is hereby made into Meiser Rishon, with the rest of the Meiser Rishon being designated next to it in the unmarked off portion. And again, we have where it's calling it chulin because not all of the tithes have been taken out of it. This Mishnah is talking about partially untithed produce. So you've done the first part of it, but you didn't go through this part that we're just trying to describe now. Now, as explained, when they're leaving out, with this chulin, it's going to be unclear why the Mishnah has the person repeat at this point the words which is on this side, since the chulin's location was already fixed earlier. And so, why is it that he's saying it again? And what's happening here is he is taking a portion of what he's designating as chulin, and he's now making that Meiser Rishon. And that's going to be, it would look like you could just say that on the portion that you've originally separated, but he's trying to do a designation from Meiser Rishon. That's part of the why, is another mention of chulin over here. Now, it's going to continue. The Mishnah is going to continue. And it's going to say that with the rest of the Meiser Rishon being designated next to it in the unmarked off portion, and that which I made Meiser Rishon in the marked off portion is now made into Trumas Meiser on the Meiser Rishon, and the rest is challah. So over here we have where they're doing it. You could either do this on a pile of produce, or you could actually do it where you're doing it where it's going to include challah. And again, that when you're doing it with the inclusion of challah, it's going to come out to just about 5%. And it's going to be less than that, obviously, if it's going to be just on tithe produce, where it's not going to be something subject to challah. Now, the separations of the portions owned to a Kohen has been accomplished, okay? And then you have, 3% that's going to be, part that's basically left aside, and that's ready to be given to a Kohen. And now you have a portion that's owed to a Levi, the Meiser Rishon, that has to be removed from the pile and given to him. That's what this is describing. And so the person is now going to conclude his tithing like this, and it's going to say, and the Meiser Sheni is hereby designated as being in the northern or southern side, and then is deconsecrated onto the coins that I have here for that purpose. So you have now where everything has been tithed, and all 5 of the tithes have been made, including the challah portion. And you have it where everything can go to the Kohen or the Levi. Now, keep in mind, this formulation of doing everything all at once only works if you already are a Kohen or a Levi. It does not work if you're a Yisrael. We're going to get into that. The Gemara says, and it's talking about this procedure for someone who's going to separate all of the gifts for the Kohanim together for bread or dough. And it was taught in a Baraisa, one who wishes to separate Truma, Trumas Meiser, and Challah together is going to take and mark off enough for Truma, Truma Meiser, and Challah all at one time. And how much is this? 1/20th of the pile. Again, this is not exact. There are 2 measurement systems in the Shas. One is going to be a general measurement system that's easy to do for people who are more simple. And then there's going to be an in-depth one that is going to be for the people who are more learned and smarter at math, who want to get the exact percentage. So this, again, is going to it's an approximation, be about 5%, so that you could say to the Am Haaretz, just do the tithes, it's about 5%. Now, the idea on this is that the first tithe, the Truma Gedola, is going to be by estimate anyway. Okay? The other ones are going to be exact, but the first one is by estimate. So if you're a little bit off on it and it's including the Truma Gedola, that's how you can get the difference between it being exactly over 5% and just about 5%. So again, this is going to be an approximation. And again, this speaker here is talking about this 5% where the challah is coming from a baker. Now, if the challah is coming from a household, and we're going to see that down the road in chapter 5, where part of the bread is going to come from a household, then it's going to be 1/24th that goes to challah. That, by the way, is 4%, just over 4%, and that is going to make the entire separation come out to about 7%. So again, it's going to depend on if it's coming from a professional baker that's a commercial bakery or just a household. So the Brisa now is going to explain how he designates these gifts. So very nice that you did all of this at the same time. How do you do this? Okay, how do you designate it out? So the Gemara is going to explain, and he says 1/100th of what is here. That's going to be 1/100th of this loaf, which is located on this side of the marked off section, is now hulin. In other words, tevel. Now, this first 100th is not going to be sanctified at this point. Rather, it's going to be unsanctified. It's going to be left as tevel. And the term hulin is usually going to be talking about tithe produce, but over here, he means that this 100th is remaining unsanctified and tevel. That's going to be the explanation by the Pnei Moshe for this. So the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, along with another 1/48th next to it. In other words, this is going to be, this 48th is also going to remain hulin for now. And the rest of the marked off portion is hereby sanctified as truma for the whole loaf. Now, the person is going to look at the portion that he initially kept as hulin. And we're looking at the hulin portion. And he says, and of the hulin that is in the marked off portion, this 100th that I originally made hulin and tevel is hereby made into Meiser Rishon, with the rest of the Meiser Rishon being designated next to it in the unmarked off portion. And that part which I made Meiser Rishon in the marked off portion is now made into Trumas Meiser for the Meiser Rishon, and the rest of the marked off portion is sanctified as challah. In other words, we see that this last part is going to be 1/48th, meaning 1/48th of the entire loaf, and that's going to include the truma portion, because even the truma portion is going to be subject to challah, just because you take out the truma, you still have the challah obligation. That's how he's coming out with this. Now, that's also a key point. Truma is subject to challah, and truma has to have challah taken out of it. So this all is basically going to be a set of approximations, and the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to conclude the tithing, and it's going to say, and the Meiser Sheni is in the northern or southern side, and it is deconsecrated onto the coins that I set aside for this purpose. Now, the Gemara is going to explain who separates these tithes in this way. Who is this for? And the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman said in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, he must recite 5 blessings, one of each of the 5 mitzvahs he was performing. In other words, this idea is that we don't smush mitzvahs together. We're recognizing them all at once. And the Rosh Cirilio says about this that one for separating for Truma, one for separating Meiser Rishon, one mitzvah for separating Truma's Meiser, one for separating Challah, and one for separating out the Meiser Sheni. An example, says the Rosh Cirilio, is before he designates the Truma Gedola, he says, blessed are you, and then he says another blessing, and it says, who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to separate Truma. And when he designates the Meiser Rishon, and then he's going to say a separate blessing on, the Meiser, and then on the Challah, and so on and so forth. Now, there's another opinion. Rabbi Chia says in Abraisa he combines all 5 into one blessing, and that's basically where he's going to say, he's going to say, blessed are you to Hashem, and then he's going to say a formulation that says it's commanded us to separate Truma, Meiser Rishon, Trumas Meiser, Challah, and Meiser Sheni. And so, since he's designating all 5 portions at once, or he's designating them one after the other, but does not speak and create a hefsek between it, he's going to recite a single blessing mentioning all 5 mitzvahs. This, by the way, is going to be what the Rambam says in Hilchos Meiser 116. And that's going to be, again, there's no hefsek. And, generally we don't smush mitzvahs together. But over here, because he's doing it in a way where he's doing all of this at one time, normally what would happen is you would take out this, and then you would find a Kohen or something, and then you would take out that, and then you would find a Levi, and then you would take, and you go through an order. But over here, this is a Kohen or a Levi doing all of it at once. Why? Because they already have partial ownership of this. So the Mishnah and the Brisa has been giving the procedure for one who wishes to separate Truma and Trumas Meiser simultaneously. And the Gemara is going to point out that this procedure is for a Kohen or a Levi. Now, this is really important, and I want to look at the Rosh Cirilio to help explain it. Now, this is specifically regarding a Kohen or a Levi who owns part of the pile. And the procedure in this Mishnah and Brisa, in which Truma and Truma Meiser are separated simultaneously, is because the law is that a Levi who owns his pile of grain separates Truma for the Kohen, and then separates out Meiser Rishon, keeps it for himself. Now, it is the Levi himself who separates out the Truma Meiser from the Meiser Rishon. And similarly, the law is that a Kohen who owns his own pile, and he separates out Truma, which he gets to keep for himself, and then he separates out Meiser Rishon, which he can also keep for himself, and that the Kohen does not need to give the Meiser Rishon, separates to a Levi, but instead he keeps it for himself. Why? Because it's basically like a Kohen is a Levi. And the Kohen then separates out Truma Meiser from the Meiser Rishon. He keeps that again for himself. And in these 2 cases, it's going to be where the Kohen or the Levi is going to own that, and that's how he can do this. But what about for a Yisrael? Well, the Gemara says, but regarding a Yisrael, if he recites a formula to separate out Trumas Meiser, he would be found to be separating Trumas Meiser from something that's not his, and the separation would be ineffective. Rosh Cirilio says about this, a Yisrael who's going to separate Meiser Rishon does not keep it, and rather he gives it to the Levi. And it's the Levi who then is commanded to separate Trumas Meiser from the Meiser Rishon. So the Israel is going to lack the authority to take the Trumas Meiser, because the Meiser Rishon, from which the Trumas Meiser is taken, is not his to tithe. In other words, he can't do this because he can't tithe the Trumas Meiser from the Meiser Rishon, because he doesn't have it. He's not allowed to do it. And because he doesn't have the authority to do it, he's not from that tribe, he's not able to do it. And that's why the Israel can't do this procedure. Now, in this Mishnah, it's teaching how somebody can separate out Truma Meiser simultaneously. This can't be talking about a Yisrael. Okay, it has to be talking about a Levi or a Kohen. Now, I want to look at some other commentary here. I want to look at commentary by Rabbi Kanievsky in this. And he's saying, although our Gemara takes for granted that Yisrael is not authorized to separate out Trumas Meiser from Meiser Rishon, he designates the matter, and he's going to cite a dispute among the Tanaim about the point. Over there, Abba Elazar ben Gamla, over in Bavli Gittin 30b, is commanding a verse to teach that the Israel may indeed separate Trumas Meiser from the Meiser Rishon he designates before he gives the Meiser Rishon to a Levi. But the Yerushalmi in Shumos 1:1 is going to also say the same ruling. And it's going to say that according to Abba Elazar ben Gamla and Rabbi Yossi, the Mishnah can be explained as discussing a Yisrael who ties his produce, and that's how it could be. So if you're looking over in Shumas 1:1, it could be that they're going to be allowed to separate this out. So the big question is, why does the Gemara not make this point regarding this Mishnah? And the answer is that since the Israel does not give the Meiser Rishon to a Levi, but rather he's going to keep it for himself regarding Demai, that's going to be part of the issue here. Part of the issue is that we're dealing here with Demai, okay, and that's something to keep in mind here. And over here, how could you have it where, again, this is a Maloket Tanayim, okay, on Tevel. Now, if you're doing this from Derai to Tevel, that's a Maloket. And they're saying that it can be done by it can only be done by the Levi or the Kohen. Over here, we're talking about Demai. So how could you have it where, like Rabbi Kanievsky is saying, that a Yisrael could even do it? Where would there be a leniency on it? And the point is, over here with Demai, the Yisrael is going to keep the Meiser Rishon of Demai for himself. He's not going to give it to a Levi. Part of it is that the tribe of Levi can't prove it's theirs. And because it's going to be doubtful whether Demai is in fact obligated in Maestros, since the original owner might have already tithed it, by the way, and then you have this principle where the burden of proof is going to rest on someone who's going to try to take payment from the other. Now, the Yisrael, under monetary law, is considered the Meiser Rishon's owner, and he's going to be entitled to separate out the Trumas Meiser from it. Now, this mission is going to be referring to definite Tevel, whose Meiser must actually be given to a Levi, and the Yisrael is thus not the Meiser Rishon's owner, so he does not have authority to it. Now, again, this is going, the case about this for Tevel is going to be a Mloket Tanayim. And over here, when we're looking at this in terms of Demai, the Yisrael is the owner of it. But when it is not Demai, he is not the owner of it. And so he can't separate out the Trumas Meiser from the Meiser Rishon because he doesn't own it. He's not a Levi. So that's going to get into a Maloket Tanayim, but that's how this Gemara is going to treat it. It's going to treat it as if the Yisrael, it's not his, and the separation would not be effective. And that this formulation is just for a Levi or Kohen because this is going to be theirs, And again, normally the way this works is that for Yisrael, you're going to separate these out one at a time. And you're going to separate it out, you give it to the right person at the right time. Have a great day.